Epilogue, the Eye of the Storm. 2 weeks later. The battle was won, but the war wasn't over. Black Dawn had retreated, fractured, bleeding but far from broken. Somewhere in the shadows they were regrouping. And Echo Division knew it was only a matter of time. But for now there was quiet, and in the quiet they rebuilt. In Eldermire, fresh troops from the 5077th rotated in, taking over from the battle-weary veterans who'd held the line. Military engineers in dust-covered uniforms worked around the clock, reinforcing the underground bunker's damaged sections, installing new defensive systems, and clearing the debris from the battlefield. The distant rumble of earth movers and the rhythmic pounding of hammers filled the air where gunfire and magical explosions had raged just days before. The wounded had been evacuated, some to Alfheim's healing chambers, others back to Earth for recovery. Command had shifted operations temporarily, giving the reconstruction teams space to work. Eli and the elves from Alfheim combed through the wreckage of Draven's fortress, salvaging what they could, documenting what they couldn't. But the real work of recovery was happening elsewhere, in quiet moments, in unexpected places, in the small pockets of peace they'd managed to carve out of the chaos. The brownstone. Rose stood in the middle of the quiet suburban street, staring at the brownstone townhouse that had once been her home. The elegant 3-story building looked like it had been through hell. Charred roof, shattered windows with protective sigils still smoking, one wall half collapsed from the magical firefight. Yellow caution tape fluttered in the breeze, ignored by everyone who mattered. Still standing, Caleb muttered behind her, shifting his weight off his injured leg. Barely, Lyra said, arms crossed as she surveyed the damage. Black Dawn had been thorough in their attack. But then the front door creaked open. A familiar voice called out, smooth as aged whiskey, "If you're just going to gawk, you might as well grab a broom." Rose blinked. Silas. The man stood there smiling. Same deep maroon vest, same immaculate cuffs, same amused expression like he'd just read the end of a book you hadn't started yet. "You," Rose said, half stunned, half relieved. "Me," Silas confirmed, stepping aside to reveal several others inside. Friends and allies who'd emerged from the shadows now that the battle had moved to another realm. A couple of off-duty mercs, a dwarven card shark, and the elf who always bet against his own fate. Argos's jaw dropped. "Wait, you guys are rebuilding this?" "Started the day after the attack," Silas said, gesturing to the scaffolding already in place along the damaged wall. "Word reached me about what happened. It seemed likely you'd be back." "Why?" Rose asked, stepping closer to what had been their home, their sanctuary on Earth before Draven's forces found them. Silas gave her that look, the one that said, "I know things you don't, and I always will." "Because places like this don't die, not when the right people still need them." His eyes softened, just barely. "You gave me a century of loyalty, Rose. Did you think I wouldn't return it?" Rose swallowed hard, uncharacteristically silent as she took in the friends working inside, patching walls, clearing debris, replacing the protective sigils. Caleb stepped forward, lifting a piece of fallen brick. "Guess we better start earning our keep." Lyra sighed dramatically but followed his lead. "At least Evelyn will be happy. She hated where we've been staying." Silas smiled, the expression warming his usually inscrutable features. "Welcome home." Again. Ridge Overwatch. Ashley, Beta, Rodriguez. Ashley leaned against the weathered wooden railing of the observation deck, methodically polishing her sidearm, while the afternoon sun warmed her face. From this vantage point on the ridge, she could see for miles across the peaceful countryside of the Pax Earth facility, so different from the chaos they'd left behind in Eldermire. Beside her, Rodriguez sat on a bench, his bandaged leg stretched out in front of him. The neural shutdown damage from the Black Dawn rifle was healing, but slowly. Doc Jewel had insisted he remain on Earth for at least another week of treatment. Beta lay between them, her massive grey head resting in Rodriguez's lap, amber eyes closed in peaceful sleep. Her flank still bore the fresh scar where a Black Dawn soldier had gotten too close, the fur just beginning to grow back over the healing wound. Rodriguez chuckled softly as the wolf's paws twitched, a low rumble escaping her throat. She's dreaming about tearing apart another mech, isn't she? Ashley's lips curved into a rare smile. Probably. Or chasing down that Black Dawn officer who tried to flank us. She holstered her weapon, gazing out at the rolling hills. She doesn't usually take to strangers. Took Darren 3 months before she'd let him within 5 feet. Rodriguez gently ran his fingers through Beta's coarse fur, careful to avoid the sensitive area around her wound. Guess nearly dying together earns you some trust points. That, or she figures you're too injured to be a threat, Ashley replied, but there was warmth in her voice that hadn't been there before the battle. They shared a look across the sleeping wolf, not romantic, just real. A bond forged in fire, the kind that didn't need words. Rodriguez shifted slightly, wincing as he adjusted his position. You miss it yet? The action? Ashley's gaze drifted toward the horizon, where storm clouds gathered in the distance. Sometimes. But this... She gestured to the peaceful scene around them. This isn't so bad either. Beta stirred, her eyes opening briefly to look up at Rodriguez before settling back into sleep with a contented sigh. She'll be ready to go back when it's time, Ashley said quietly. We all will. And they both knew. When the next battle came, they'd face it together. Bianca's kitchen. The massive industrial kitchen at the workshop had been running non-stop for 14 days. Steam billowed from enormous pots, the air thick with the aromas of slow-cooked meats, fresh herbs, and baking bread. Bianca moved through the organized chaos with practiced precision, her sleeves rolled up, a smudge of flour on her cheek as she inspected each dish before it was packed for transport. More salt in the stew, less pepper in the sauce, she called over her shoulder to her improvised kitchen staff, 2 off-duty engineers and an elven apprentice who'd shown unexpected talent for human cuisine. The portal hummed to life in the adjoining room, right on schedule for the evening meal transport. Bianca wiped her hands on her apron, surveying the day's work with critical eyes. Insulated containers stacked high, bread still steaming from the ovens, desserts packed with care. Another journey, another meal, she muttered, helping to load the first containers onto the transport carts. The portal crossing was seamless, practiced after 2 weeks of repetition. When Bianca emerged into the bunker's makeshift dining hall, she found the usual sight: exhausted soldiers and elves sitting elbow to elbow at tables too small for their weapons or egos, their faces lit up at the arrival of the food carts, a brief moment of genuine pleasure in the grinding work of reconstruction. As she began setting up the serving station, Gunnar stepped in, plate in hand. She gave him an arch look. You do know how to serve yourself, right? Not like this, he said, nodding to the spread as the containers were opened, releasing clouds of fragrant steam. I miss the kitchen almost as much as I miss peace. She handed him a ladle and grinned. Good, because peace is overrated, and we've still got mouths to feed. Gunnar took the ladle and almost smiled, tugging at his lips. How many trips is this now? 28, Bianca answered without hesitation. Twice a day, 14 days. And I'll keep doing it until these people have a proper mess hall again. She gestured toward a table where human engineers sat shoulder to shoulder with elven warriors, all speaking the universal language of appreciation for a hot meal. Look at that. You know what that is? Gunnar followed her gaze. Dinner? Bianca shook her head. That's how alliances are really built. Not in war rooms or at diplomatic tables, in kitchens, at dinner tables, breaking bread together. She nodded to where an elven warrior was showing a human soldier how to properly season his stew with the herb mixture she'd provided. My grandmother always said, feed them well and they'll fight for each other, not just the cause. Gunnar watched the scene a moment longer, something softening in his expression. Smart woman. Your grandmother. Damn right, Bianca said, already turning to organize the dessert distribution. Now eat. You're still too skinny, and I've got 2 realms to feed. Workshop Command Center. The workshop on Earth hummed with activity, a hive of recovery and preparation. Through the massive windows of the command center, construction vehicles moved across the grounds as the 5077th expanded the perimeter defenses, building new barracks and training facilities. The aftermath of war had become a catalyst for growth. Clara stood at the central tactical display, her silver hair pulled back in a tight braid, her posture rigid despite 2 weeks of exhaustion weighing on her shoulders. As Pack Alpha on Earth, she carried Gunner's authority in his absence, coordinating between realms while he maintained command at the Eldermire bunker. The eastern quadrant is behind schedule, she noted, finger tracing along the holographic blueprint. We need those sensor arrays operational by tomorrow. Darren, leaning against a nearby console, nodded. Already on it. Got a team working double shifts. He looked more dishevelled than usual, dust from construction sites clinging to his boots, papers tucked under one arm as he juggled logistics between two worlds. The 5077th are damn good builders, I'll give them that. Never seen a battalion move Earth this fast. The wolves have been helping, Clara said, a hint of pride in her voice. Omega led 3 of them on a perimeter sweep this morning, showing the engineers where the weak points are. Shade entered the command center, his massive frame filling the doorway. Despite the healing gash across his temple and the still visible black veins snaking up his neck from Andolin's corrupted blade, he moved with purpose. "Katrina's awake," he announced, his voice tight with an emotion he wouldn't name. Clara and Darren exchanged glances. Katrina had been drifting in and out of consciousness for days, the dark magic from her wound resisting even the most powerful elven healing. "And?" Darren prompted. "And she's asking for her sword," Shade replied, the ghost of a smirk touching his lips. "Said something about finishing what we started once she can stand without falling over." Clara nodded, unsurprised. "That sounds like Katrina." "The healers say another week at least," Shade continued, moving to study the tactical display. "The corruption is receding, but slowly." Something in his voice shifted when he spoke of Katrina, a complexity of emotions that belied their complicated history. "And Andolin?" Clara asked quietly. Shade's expression darkened. "When I find him again, there won't be enough left to bring back for questioning." Darren snorted. "Get in line. Trinity's got a bullet with her name on it too." He tapped a section of the display, bringing up the progress report from Eldermire. "Desera's got the bunker locked down tight. Full surveillance grid, rotating patrols. Says even a shadow couldn't slip in unnoticed." "Good," Clara said. "We can't afford another surprise." She moved to another section of the display, bringing up security footage of the new portal chamber under construction. "Gunner wants this operational by the end of the week. Direct line to the bunker, controlled access only." Darren rubbed a hand down his face, exhaustion briefly showing through his usual facade. "Remind me why I agreed to coordinate with the 5077th again. I was supposed to be retired." "Because you're the only one they listen to," Clara replied simply. "And because you'd be bored anywhere else," Shade added. Darren grinned, unable to argue with that assessment. "Fair enough." He checked his watch. "I've got 5 minutes before the next briefing with the Colonel. Anyone need anything blown up while I'm out there?" "Just focus on building, not demolishing," Clara said, but there was warmth in her voice. As Darren headed for the door, Shade moved closer to Clara, his voice lowering. "Any word on the boy?" She shook her head. "Nothing." Trinity covered her tracks well. "But we're looking." "The Demon King's son," Shade muttered, his massive hands curling into fists. "If he's half as powerful as his father." "We'll find him," Clara said with quiet determination. "We found each other, didn't we?" Shade nodded, understanding the deeper meaning behind her words. The pack had always been more than a military unit. They were family, forged in battle, bound by something stronger than blood. "I should check on Katrina," he said after a moment. Clara watched him go, then turned back to the tactical display. Somewhere out there, Black Dawn was regrouping. Trinity and Andalin were planning their next move. The Demon King's son was growing stronger. But so were they. Fortress ruins. The collapsed fortress looked different in daylight, less a site of battle, more an archaeological dig. 2 weeks of careful excavation had cleared much of the rubble, revealing the underground chambers where Draven's machine had nearly torn reality apart. Eli moved carefully through the ruins, her scanner humming as she assessed each artifact before cataloguing it. Though her injuries from the battle had mostly healed, she still walked with a slight limp, pausing occasionally to rest her still tender ribs. The data flowing across her screens painted patterns only she fully understood. Residual energy signatures, magical imprints, the echoes of what had nearly destroyed them all. The resonance patterns are stabilizing, she noted, adjusting her scanner. The ley lines are almost back to their natural configuration. Alatheris nodded, kneeling beside a partially excavated console. His nimble fingers traced the intricate runes etched into its surface, his expression contemplative. Draven's work was remarkable in its way. Flawed, corrupted, but built on principles that might have been revolutionary under different circumstances. That's what makes it dangerous, Eli replied, shooting him a knowing look. Genius twisted to destruction is still genius. Nearby, Mylorion supervised a team of elven mages as they carefully dismantled a section of the machine's core components. The High Guardian had shed his ceremonial robes for more practical attire, though the First Blade remained at his side, its presence a reminder of who truly commanded this operation. Careful with the containment field, he instructed as 2 mages lifted a pulsing crystal node. That component connects directly to the dimensional resonator. The mages nodded, their movements precise as they secured the node in a specially designed containment case. Around them, similar cases stood ready for transport, each labelled, each destined for secure study in Alfheim's most protected vaults. Outside the excavation area, a perimeter of elven guards stood vigilant, their armour gleaming in the midday sun. Among them, a heavy weapons squad from the 5077th had set up defensive positions, machine gun nests covering all approaches, mortar teams ready to respond to any threat. The unlikely allies worked with practiced coordination, human and elven patrols moving in synchronized patterns. Eli approached Mylorion, her scanner displaying a new reading. We've reached the primary control matrix. This is what Draven used to redirect the ley lines. Mylorion studied the data, his ancient eyes narrowing slightly. Can it be safely extracted? With proper containment protocols, yes, Eli confirmed. But it's not just the physical components we need to worry about. The magical templates, the formulas Draven developed. She hesitated. They exist now. They can't be unthought. Knowledge is never truly destroyed, Mylorion agreed, his voice carrying the weight of centuries. We do not seek to erase what was discovered, only to ensure it is understood by those who will not misuse it. Alatheris joined them, carefully carrying a small crystal sphere that glowed with inner fire. This is remarkable. A power amplification matrix unlike anything in our archives. The craftsmanship is... He caught Eli's knowing glance and smiled. Dangerous, yes, but still worthy of study. That's why we're here, Eli said, accepting the sphere and securing it in a containment field, to learn without repeating Draven's mistakes. A soldier from the 5077th approached, his enchanted rifle held at the ready. Ma'am, perimeter report. All clear, but we've got some unusual energy readings about a mile east. Residual discharge from the collapsed ley lines, Eli explained, checking her scanner. It's harmless, but keep your distance all the same. The soldier nodded and returned to his post. Eli watched him go, noting the ease with which the human moved among the elven guards. 2 weeks ago, such cooperation would have seemed remarkable. Now it was simply necessary. Mylorion's gaze swept over the excavation site, taking in the careful work of dozens of specialists. We will need another week to complete the extraction. Once the key components are secured, the remainder can be safely dismantled and transported to Alfheim. And there? What happens to all this? Eli gestured to the collection of artifacts they'd already catalogued. Study, understanding, and then, once we have learned what we can, containment, Melorian answered. Some knowledge must be preserved, even that which is dangerous, if only to ensure it is never again misused. Eli nodded, turning back to her work. As she catalogued another component, her thoughts drifted to the workshop on Earth, to the base in Eldermire, to the scattered members of the pack recovering across realms. The machine had been stopped, but Draven's legacy lived on. In the artifacts they collected, in the wounds still healing, and, somewhere out there, in a child who carried the blood of a demon king. Her scanner beeped, drawing her back to the present. One crisis at a time, she reminded herself. Today they focused on understanding what had nearly destroyed them. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges. Alatheris, she called, I need your expertise on this resonance pattern. The work continued, methodical and careful, beneath the watchful eyes of those who understood exactly what was at stake. Outside the command bunker, Gunnar and Aeliana. The sun hung low over Eldermire, casting long shadows across the scarred battlefield where, 2 weeks earlier, they had faced extinction. Gunnar stood at the edge of the newly reinforced observation point, his silhouette stark against the fading light. His cybernetic hand gripped the railing, the metal fingers occasionally flexing as his eye scanned the horizon. Vigilant, as always. They're not done, he muttered, tracking movement in the distant hills that was probably just wildlife but could be scouts. They're pulling back, restructuring. We should be hunting them. Aeliana approached silently, now dressed in worn leathers instead of her guardian armor. She moved to stand beside him, close enough that someone watching might have wondered if their shoulders touched. They didn't, but the space between them had always said more than contact ever could. And you will, she said, her voice carrying a gentleness reserved only for him. But not today. He didn't look at her, but his posture shifted almost imperceptibly toward her presence. You have survivors to lead, she continued, wounded to heal, a world to rebuild. The light caught the silver in her hair, reminding him of that moment before the battle when she had appeared in her full guardian regalia, taken his hand in front of everyone, and whispered those words that still echoed in his mind. Come back to me. Finally he sighed. I don't know how to stop. You don't, she said, and now her hand rested on the railing beside his, not quite touching but close enough to feel the warmth. You pause, you breathe, then you keep going. When it's time. Gunnar looked down at the datapad in his hand. Intelligence reports names, possible hideouts, Trinity and Anderlin's possible locations, the search for the Demon King's son, all the fights that still lay ahead. He closed it. The datapad lowered to his side, and for the first time in what felt like days, Gunnar let out a breath that wasn't about strategy, loss, or war. He turned to face her. Aeliana met his gaze unwavering. No armor, no pretense. Just her, silver hair catching the dying light, eyes that had seen more than most could endure, and yet somehow still held wonder in them when she looked at him. Gunnar reached out, his real hand, not the cybernetic one, scarred, calloused, but warm. His fingers brushed against her cheek, tracing the curve with a reverence that said more than any battlefield speech ever could. She didn't flinch. She leaned into the touch. I should have said it before, he murmured, his voice low and raw. Aeliana tilted her head slightly into his hand, her eyes never leaving his. Then say it now. His thumb lingered at the corner of her mouth. I need you, he said. Not as a guardian, not for strategy. Just you. For a heartbeat, time held still. The ruins of Eldermire faded, the weight of survival and politics and war melting into silence. She stepped forward, close enough that her breath mingled with his, and whispered, "Then take me. Just for this moment." Gunnar didn't hesitate. He leaned in and kissed her. It was not desperate. It was anchored. In years of unspoken words, midnight glances, and wounds that only the other could ever understand. Her hands rose to his chest, fingers curled against the worn fabric of his jacket. His hand slid to the back of her neck, pulling her just that fraction closer. There was no more battlefield between them. No duty. No worlds to carry. Just them. When they finally parted, foreheads resting together, her hand still on his chest, he whispered against her skin, "I came back to you." Aeliana's smile trembled, just barely. "You always do." Final beat. That night, a lantern burned on the balcony of the brownstone. Its light reached far, into the rubble, the hills, and the hearts of those who still fought. Black Dawn was still out there, but so were they. This wasn't the end, but it was the beginning of what came next.